Before we go forward, I'd like to take you back. Not years, but decades. Picture yourself when you're 5 years old. I know, I'm so cute. What made you feel safe or seen? What made you feel curious or hopeful? We start life full of wonder. And even in that not knowing, we feel the world deeply. We sense when something fits and when it doesn't. When we're 5, we have that kind of clarity unclouded by expectation. I'm a developmental psychologist and a professor. And for the past 25 years, I've tried to carry that clarity into my work, exploring questions about how we grow and how we learn, how we find meaning in each other and in the lives we're building. But for many of us, that wonder, it fades. Not all at once, but slowly over time. What's meaningful, even beautiful, gets buried beneath all the things we're told matter more. The schedules and the deadlines, the demands, life gets louder until eventually the wonder goes quiet, until all that's left is the noise. We now know more than ever, but do we understand any better? But that's what the poet T.S. Eliot asked nearly a century ago. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Because Eliot saw something coming. He warned us of endless invention, endless experiment, a world full of creation, but lacking in meaning and connection. And his quiet challenge, those two questions, inspired the one I've carried across my career. How do we build tools and systems for learning and for health and for life that offer not just information, but wisdom? Over a century ago, the psychologist William James described a baby's world as a great bloomin', buzzing confusion. Now it's a vivid image, and it still gets quoted a lot, but James was wrong. Babies aren't confused. They're tuned in and capable and learning right from the start. Only he couldn't see that, and not because babies lacked ability, but because science lacked the tools and the imagination to understand what they already knew. We mistook our limitations for theirs. And that mistake still happens when we dismiss what we don't yet know how to see. We underestimate people, and not because they're incapable, but because we stopped imagining what might be possible. And when we build from those assumptions, we create tools that reflect our constraints and not their capacities. So, what if, instead of designing for simplicity, we designed for complexity? I've spent much of my career exploring those ideas, collaborating with partners from education and kid media, health, global development, organizations like Sesame Workshop, PBS Kids, WGBH in Boston, to policymakers here in the US and abroad. And in each case, my role has been the same: translating developmental science into systems that actually work for people as they are, messiness and all. And again, I find myself guided by the same 3 elements. I call this approach PACK. PACK stands for persons, artifacts, and contexts. Each element helped me focus on something essential. Persons, kids and caregivers, educators and families that we're designing for. Artifacts, what are we building? These are the media and the apps, the tools and the toys we're making to deliver care and learning. And then context, where and how are we going to use it? And that's more than the physical space. That's the routines and relationships where life actually unfolds. Now, each corner matters on its own, but when all three align, that's where transformation happens. And PAC helps me keep people visible inside the systems we're building. Let me show you what this looks like with a story about lions and literacy and listening to the data. Between the Lions was a PBS Kids TV show developed by the same minds behind Sesame Street. Only this time the goal was different. It was to help struggling readers learn how to read, especially those who had already aged out of Sesame Street. Over a decade, I helped to shape and study that system, from the curriculum to episode structure to the classrooms that brought it to life. And here's what we learned. When you bring people and tools and settings into alignment, the results don't just add up, they multiply. Let me show you what that looks like. We measured progress against a national baseline, the reading gap between under-resourced children and their more advantaged peers. Now, that gap represents about a year's worth of reading development. We're going to set that at 100%. Now, when kids watch the show daily for a month, they reached 110%, narrowly outperforming the national baseline. That's the artifact, the tool working powerfully on its own. When we moved it into classrooms, daily viewing wasn't possible. And so we reduced screen time and added a rigorously developed curriculum. But those materials were developed in Boston and then dropped into places like Mississippi, where they weren't adapted to the children they were meant to reach. And so the impact dropped, as you can see, to 55%. So we had reduced the artifact and we had tried to supplement it, but it didn't fit the kids' lives. And that was our first big lesson. When one corner is misaligned, the whole system breaks down. So we shifted. We co-selected books and video clips that matched kids' cultures and lives, designed with families and educators and not just for them. But context was still missing. The teachers who were expected to use the materials didn't receive the support that they needed. And so once again, the impact dropped. It was only half. So we decided, hey, we need to look at context. Let's take a look at that. We worked with teachers to adapt the materials to real children in real classrooms facing real challenges. And when we had all three elements, persons, artifacts, and context, and bringing them into alignment, the kids closed 80% of the gap, and offering us a glimpse at what alignment could make possible. But the real breakthrough came when we brought all three together: developmentally attuned media, culturally grounded materials, and mentoring and training that was sustained and meaningful, and the impact jumped to 170%. Kids didn't just bridge the gap, they leapt ahead. Because what made Between the Lions work wasn't just the content, it was the fit, the intentional connection among people and settings and the real world. It's what PAC makes visible. Not just if something works, but why it works and how to make it better. And the beauty of this approach is that it doesn't just apply to kids or classrooms or TV shows. It applies wherever life is complex and personal and deeply human. More recently, I've turned my focus to another group who's often overlooked: informal caregivers. Millions of people, parents and spouses, adult children, neighbors and friends, quietly holding it together, managing medications and scheduling appointments, coordinating care, often while working, often while parenting, and usually without a break. To understand them better, I turned to the caregivers themselves, listening to the lives behind their labor. In a national study of more than 1,000 caregivers, I discovered something simple yet profound. Same tasks, different stories. Because care is personal, and so is the cost. Some caregivers were driven by duty or love, others by culture or faith, and some didn't have a choice. But their motives affected everything: how they felt, how stressed out they got, whether they burned out or bounced back. The same task could exhaust one person but energize someone else. And not because of what they were doing, but because of how well the role fit who they were. And yet, we keep building systems as if people's lives are interchangeable. We try to standardize what should be contextualized. And when systems don't fit, they don't just fail to help, they can actually cause harm. And not because people are broken, but because the systems are. So we anchored our work in the same three PAC corners: persons, caregivers, who each have their own why and their own weight to carry; artifacts, a system responsive to the motives and the mindsets of those who care; and contexts, messy and moving and real, with shifting routines and tangled demands. We don't have the same literacy style percentages yet, but we're seeing the same patterns. When all three corners align, transformation happens, because we started in the right place, with people and not problems, with science rooted in real life. When systems ignore the human cost of care, society pays a larger one, and we can't afford to keep designing like that. We've covered a lot, from lions and literacy to caregivers holding it together, to the power of aligning people and tools and the real life. But at the heart of it all is a deeper question about how we care. Because real impact doesn't come from metrics, it comes from building with empathy, with seeing people clearly and holding space for the realities they carry and meeting them where they are. Because the most important question shouldn't be, does this tool work? The most important question should be, does it fit the life someone is actually living? That's what T.S. Eliot warned us not to lose. Not just knowledge that explains, but understanding that connects. Care is personal. So is learning, and so is health. Yet we keep trying to systematize complexity without centering the people these systems are meant to serve. This is Mr. Rogers, the gentle voice behind Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, who invited millions of children to feel safe and seen. And he understood all of this way before I had words for it. And he said it simply and beautifully: I like you just the way you are. Now, I grew up watching Mr. Rogers, and I believed him. And that belief shaped the person and the scholar I try to be. Because when systems are built with empathy, they remind people they matter. So, the next time you build a system, or a policy, or a plan, or a tool, or you make a decision about how someone else moves through the world, I want you to pause and then ask yourselves, who is this really for? What am I truly building? And does it fit the life someone is actually living? Let's go build that world, the one your 5-year-old self knew was possible. Thank you.